that I'm going to use to run everything that's under that is in the following lines. If I use the hash in any other line, in any other position, it's just for a comment. So this is my program. So here we just have a comment. I will clear the screen. So here inside this program, I can use any shell command, and I will say echo. Echo will display the screen what I'm going to say right now. This is the number of processors I have. And here I will just execute that line. Cat / proc / CPU info. Is that correct? Let's see. Type grep processor, type wc-l. Let's see if it works. I'm gonna save and I'm gonna exit. Let's take a look at our command, at our shell. Okay, here it is. Now let's execute. I can execute by saying bash, oops, numproc, and here it is. This is the number of processors I had, 12. But let's take a look right now at this program that we just created, numproc.sh. Let's use the -l to give more information about this file. So here we see that I can read, write, other users in my group can read and write, and everyone else in the system can only read, cannot write nor execute. So right now I cannot do something like just call the program, execute from here, numproc. / means execute from here. .sh. It doesn't work. It says the permission is denied. I need to change this into an executable. So one way of doing that is using chmod, change mode, +x, means make it executable, the program that I just created. Now, if we take a look again at the long listing of the information of this file, you see that it became green. But also now that we have the X for execution for the user, for the group, user is me, for the group I belong, and for all others in the system. One important thing, if you are working with security, you will just give the permissions that are actually needed for people who need to use that. So let's suppose that I'm just creating this program. I don't want anyone else to see it. So I will go ahead and remove the permissions for you must think about user, group, and others. User is myself. Group is the ones that belong to my group. You saw that on the etc group that I belong to the group ADM and the sudo group. So and also my own group. So people that belong to these groups would be able to do things if I gave them the permissions in the G. So think about the 3 first letters for user, the others, the ones in the middle are for the group, and the ones here at the right are for others, everyone in the system. So I will say change mode for the group and for the others, -x for this program numproc. Now let's take a look. So you see now only I can execute. But I also don't want my group and the others to read and to write. So I can do that. Change do minus write and minus read and minus write. Let's take a look at that right now. Okay, so I am the only one right now who can read, write, and execute this program. No one else can do anything else. There is another way that I can do that. If you think about for the user, myself, for the group, and for the others, you have the permissions that can be read, write, execute. Read, those are positions in the keys that you turn on and off. So here you have three keys for read, for write, and execute, and they can be turned on and off. So this is for the first position, X, think of 2 to the power of 0, which is 1. For the right, it's 2 to the right to the power of 1, which is 2. And for the read, is 2 to the power of 2, which is 4. So it's 4 to 1. So if you add those numbers to the permissions, you can use chmod in another way. You can do something like, for instance, chmod 777. So I'm adding 4, 2, and 1 for the user, for the group, and for the others. numproc.sh. And if I do an ls right now, so you see now everyone can do everything. This is something that is very interesting, and administrators will use this a lot other than using something like this GO minus RW, because after some time you actually get used with this binary that we represent in the octal format, and it makes life easier for you to change. For instance, if I want to change it back to a way that I can do everything and the others cannot do anything, my group and the others, I'll just do 0, 0. Let's take a look at that again. So there you go, exactly what we wanted. And this is something that for students, it's most of the time it's difficult to understand that, because we are not used to the binary format of this kind of things. So let me just minimize that and let me show you one small thing that I created, which is the, let me write in the terminal so you'll be able to access. It's a small spreadsheet which is located in broadtech.com /chmoderator. The thing that will do the chmod for you. And now let me go back to the navigator. And here you go. So I recommend, if you are going to use this for yourself or to teach someone else, the first thing that you should do is go here and do a file and make a copy. So it will make a copy for you. And here you can play with the permissions for the user, for the group, and for the others, read, write, execute. So here, for instance, I'm saying that myself as the user, I can do everything. So I add 4 and 2 and 1, which you already know now that are 2 to the power of 0, 2 to the power of 1, and 2 to the power of 2. The ones in my group, they can only read and execute. And I actually am not going to allow them to read the program. I just want them to be able to execute the program. So you see, as I change the permissions in here, the number in here changes. And for the others, well, okay, the others in my system can also execute and only execute. So I have 711. So if I do chmod 711, I will have rwx, nothing, nothing x, and nothing, nothing x. So let's just try very quickly to see if it works. So chmod 711 numproc, and now let's take a look. Exactly as I wanted. I can read, write, execute. The ones in my group can only execute, and the others in my systems can only execute. Let me stop my screen sharing right now. Okay, so I'm back here with you. These things, again, they are so important for the life of a system administrator that they are covered in our most essential Linux certification, which is called Linux Essentials. It is some people that are just starting with web servers, for instance. People tend to, like if I install WordPress or something like that, people will, something doesn't work. So people go ahead and do a chmod 777 in all of the files in the folder for the pages that you are serving to the web. Now they have the permission that everybody can do everything. And this is very dangerous, because if someone finds out a way to get into your system, they will do that through the files that you allow the permission to do everything they want. So never use permissions like 777. The golden rule here, if you are a system administrator, only give permissions for those who deserve the permissions, for those who know what to do. Only place those people in your system, the users in your systems, in the admin or in the sudo group, if they actually need to do this kind of thing. And another important thing, if you are, most of the systems now, as you install, they create a user, they ask you to provide a password for that user, and they will add this user to the sudo group. So that the user that you create when you're installing your system will be able to ask super users to do things for them. Most modern systems, they don't even have a password for the root user. So if someone is able to get into your system, as the root user doesn't have a password, it will be very difficult for them to become a root user. So that is it. This is pretty much the things that are covered in the Linux Essentials. Topic 5, security. Of course, do take a look at learning.lpi.org, that you'll see more things in there if you are going to take this certification. But here, in this half an hour, I just wanted to tell you that these are the things that you need to worry about if you are going to administer a Linux system. Thank you very much. I do not see any questions in here, but if you do have questions, let me just switch to my terminal again. I will write my email in here. Oh, I only have 3 minutes right now, so let me clear. I am cbrod@lpi.org, so feel free to email me. And I am also Cesar Brod and all social networks. And here with me are my friends Juan Ibarra at lpi.org and Hernan Paches at lpi.org. Thank you all, and thank you guys at the Togman Foundation for inviting us to be here at your event. It is very good to be here with you. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
And thanks LPI for sponsoring the conference, by the way.
Hola Juan, ¿qué tal?
Hola César, ¿bien y tú?
Muy bien, ahora cambiando de inglés para español, vamos a tener nuestra próxima ponencia. Ya los de la organización ya me habían dicho que solamente en la sala 1 tenemos un mediador. Entonces, en la sala 3, nosotros vamos a presentar a nosotros mismos. Son 8 en punto, ahora en Brasil, creo que a 1 da tarde en Europa. En Paraguay, ¿qué horas tenemos, Juan?
7 de la mañana.
Y en Costa Rica, ¿no?
En Costa Rica serían las 5 de la mañana.
5 de la mañana. Entonces, Hernán acaba de salir de su cama.
Probablemente.
Bueno, entonces solamente me voy a presentar nuevamente. Yo soy César Brod, director de Relaciones con las Comunidades para las Lenguas Hispánicas y portugués también. Junto conmigo está la persona que va a ser la parte principal de la charla, que va a ser aquí va a ser casi que un talk show. Entonces tenemos Hernán Pachas aquí y también Juan Ibarra, que es el responsable por el suceso de los partners de LPI. Hernán, dejo contigo entonces para empezar esa charla. Y tú estás mudo, Hernán. No te escuchamos, ¿verdad?
Aún no. Bueno,
Hola.
pero ahora sí, ahora sí. De todas formas, antes de que ingrese Hernán, me gustaría nada más presentar y dar la palabra. Bueno, dar la bienvenida a todos y comentarles que la charla va a tratar de explicar y comentar un poquito eh, cómo se desarrollan las certificaciones de Linux. Y claro, de acuerdo al título, siempre decimos que es por y para la comunidad. Esta charla va a ser en español. Y vamos a estar, como ya decía César, haciendo comentarios entre todos. Y nada, ahora cedo la palabra a Hernán Pachas e iniciamos. Adelante, Hernán.
Gracias, Juan. Gracias, César. Muy bien, tenemos muy poco tiempo, así que trataremos de ser rápidos y efectivos en la explicación. Muy bien, el día de hoy hemos dividido la agenda en 4 espacios muy sencillos. Un poco saber la demanda de las áreas de recursos humanos con respecto a la contratación de personas en tecnología. Es bueno saber a dónde vamos a trabajar y si realmente existe una demanda por ese tipo de personas o ese tipo de perfil. Y luego el tema de, oye, ¿qué es mejor? ¿Ser certificado o simplemente colocar dentro del perfil que vamos a colocar dentro de nuestra empresa, que es solamente colocar con conocimiento en? Entonces vamos a tener la diferencia entre una y otro, ¿no? O sea, ¿es necesario colocar solamente con conocimiento en o nos vamos a colocar a partir de ahora certificado en? Para luego pasar a mirar cuál es el roadmap que utilizamos dentro del EPI para iniciar y entregar una certificación de temas relacionados a Linux y Open Source. Y por último, vamos a conversar sobre el tema de empleabilidad. ¿Ok? Damos entonces siguiente. La demanda por los áreas de recursos humanos en tecnología. ¿Cómo están al día de hoy? Para esto nos vamos a basar en base a los estudios que han hecho la Linux Foundation en el reporte basados en el 2018 y en el 2021. Para el 2018 teníamos que el 90% de áreas de recursos humanos o los que encargados de recursos humanos no encontraban expertos en temas relacionados a Linux y Open Source. El 80% de estas áreas daban como prioridad la contratación de expertos en temas relacionados a Linux y Open Source, y más del 50% de empleados decían de que ellos eran capaces de poder certificar a sus empleados. César y Juan, cuando usen, pueden continuar con algún comentario.
Nada,
Avanzamos.
en este caso, nada más, como decías, mostrar un poquito lo que fue el 2018 y ahora, digamos, la contrapartida de cómo está quedando, digamos, a la actualidad, siendo también un contraste con lo que es el 2020 y 2021.
Exacto, lo cual da vista de que ha aumentado, o sea, entre el 2018 y el 2021 el porcentaje de empleadores que priorizan la contratación de profesionales certificados está en aumento. Cada vez se dan cuenta que es necesario tener dentro de su staff personas certificadas. Y esto básicamente es porque van a poder obtener, gracias al equipo de personas certificadas, menor riesgo que sus productos o servicios que brinden tengan alguna falla o alguna tardanza o algún tipo de inconsistencia con lo que vayan a entregar a su usuario final. ¿Sí? ¿Avanzamos? Esto va relacionado ya hacia el 2021, donde en comparación al 2018, casi todo se mantiene o han avanzado. Por ejemplo, más del 50%, otra vez, de gerentes de recursos humanos o reclutadores planean incrementar la contratación de profesionales en open source. Más del 80% ha iniciado la certificación dentro de sus profesionales como una prioridad. Y casi el 97% dicen, o sea, que el talento de personas con talentos en open source es prioridad. César, ¿aquí hay algún comentario? Tú que estás más de cerca con las certificaciones y los empleadores.
Ah, básicamente, Hernán, es que siempre que hablo con las empresas, con aquellos que están trabajando en la gestión de recursos humanos, es que en verdad una certificación los ayuda a poner, vamos a decir, ese currículum arriba de los otros, porque la persona además de demostrar con su certificación que ya conoce aquele tópico, aquele tema, que também é uma pessoa que está se preocupando em manter-se em linha com o que se passa no mercado. Una certificación, además de mostrar los conocimientos de una persona, muestra que esa persona quiere seguir siempre aprendiendo. Básicamente, es eso que me gustaría decir.
Y eso es muy importante porque algo que, por ejemplo, Juan, aquí nosotros antes hablábamos y conversábamos de manera visual, porque era algo que nosotros sentíamos de la industria, hoy día se ve reflejado en números que ya han sido encuestados, o sea, ya es una realidad, y creo que eso es algo muy importante tener en cuenta, que ya no, esto no es algo que dice el EPI, esto no es algo que dice Juan o César o Hernán, esto es algo que evidencia que el talento realmente está siendo calificado mejor en base a una certificación. Bueno, más del tema de que a la gente la gente de recursos humanos le gusta más a personas con certificaciones, casi 80% de los encargados de contratación prefieren una persona con certificación. Los reportes también hacen que el incremento de las personas que están con certificación aumente sus salarios, y esto también incrementa que dentro de los equipos técnicos tengan un mejor entrenamiento o requieren más entrenamiento. Entonces, creo que esta información que le entregamos ahora es para que visualicen más o menos dónde podemos estar puestos, ¿no? Basta con que ya tenga conocimiento y que yo sepa que tengo conocimiento y que eso me va a dar la oportunidad de aprovechar una oportunidad que se encuentre en el mercado, o es necesario que ya comience a avanzar hacia esa dirección.
Y esto está siendo como una reacción en cadena, básicamente, porque a más demanda de profesionales por open source es más demanda de skills, más demanda de certificaciones, pago de salario, tratar de mantener el talento dentro de las compañías, porque no es solamente contratar y tener profesional dentro, es tratar de mantenerlo dentro del staff sin que otra empresa le ofrezca, digamos, algo mejor y se vaya y se te escape. Entonces, realmente, si incluso van más allá y ven el informe completo, van a encontrar detalles muy interesantes.
Sí, inclusive ahora que tú hablas de talento, hay un reporte, dentro de este mismo reporte, habla que para las empresas es muy complicado retener el talento de todas sus organizaciones. Y esto va porque si alguien realmente tiene los certificados, ya demostró que es bueno, entonces es muy probable que la competencia o alguien dentro del mercado va a comenzar a buscarlo y ofrecerle un mejor salario, una mejor posición para que migre a esta nueva oportunidad. Entonces, teniendo esto como base, sabiendo de que, cómo estamos al día de hoy, la pregunta es, ¿me certifico o simplemente es necesario estar con el conocimiento para poder aprovechar las oportunidades? Muy bien, lo que esta gráfica quiere explicar, espero que se entienda de esa manera, es que tú puedes tener el conocimiento básico, normal, avanzado o experto, ¿ok? Esto es lo que tú tienes y que puede ser que lo hayas logrado porque fuiste a un curso, porque te entrenaste, porque hiciste un autoestudio, ¿ok? Pero las oportunidades que se van a presentar en el mercado, que es lo que están al costado, es que las personas certificadas son los que van a aprovechar mejor esta posición. Entonces puede ser que hayan 10 posiciones y el certificado es más rápido que lo pueda obtener. Las demás pueden obtenerla, pero le va a ser más difícil ocupar una posición. Ahora, si seguimos, Juan. Ahora, ¿esto cómo se traduce? ¿Cómo se está traduciendo ya en la industria? Si eres una persona que tiene conocimiento, es muy probable que la empresa donde tú vayas a estar se mantenga, porque no va a haber más que simplemente tener alguien que tiene conocimiento, pero que la empresa no requiere crecimiento. O sea, vas a tener lo básico. ¿Sabes qué? Hazme esta configuración y ya está. Mira, manténme este servidor, ya está. Mira, quiero que simplemente lo que tú hagas es que no se caiga el servidor o que este servicio lo mantengas estable, ya está. Entonces, de año a año, esta empresa no va a crecer y por ende, si la empresa no crece, tú tampoco, porque no te va a exigir más de lo que ya sabes. En cambio, una empresa que tiene un staff donde tiene personas certificadas y personas conocimientos, es muy probable que esta empresa empiece a crecer lento, pero crece. Y si esa empresa crece un poco más, significa que tú también vas a exigirte un poco más para poder crecer junto con la empresa. Y lo que están haciendo al día de hoy muchas empresas, y sí lo demuestran los resultados de la encuesta, es que al mantener un staff completamente certificado, va a hacer que el crecimiento también sea de la misma manera, porque ya al tener personas que saben qué hacer, cómo hacerlo, entonces decir, ya no solamente configúrame, ahora quiero que me soluciones, que te integres, mira, tengo un cliente externo y quiero integrar su base de datos, mira, yo quiero ahora tener soluciones basadas en cloud. Entonces, eso también hace que el crecimiento de la persona que tiene talento, que tiene conocimiento y que esté certificada, tenga mayor exposición en una industria tan competitiva. ¿Qué les parece esto, César, Juan? No sé si esto lo han vivido en alguno de los partners que tenemos.
Creo que esa es una cosa que vivimos todo el día en el mercado de trabajo, hermano. Realmente lo que interesa ver los empleadores es que mismo que las personas no tengan algún conocimiento específico, hoy muchas empresas están contratando a las personas porque no perceben que esa persona quiere seguir adelante en su carrera de aprendizaje a través de las certificaciones también. Las certificaciones, claro, no es la única cosa importante para las personas. Las personas deben mantener un portafolio de las cosas que están estudiando y realizando. Pero la certificación sí va a ayudar a las empresas que van a contratar a realmente saber que una determinada persona tiene un determinado tipo de conocimiento.
Entonces, sabiendo ese tema, ahora sí entramos al tema de la roadmap de la certificación, porque ya sabemos que existe demanda, sabemos que esta demanda es muy atractiva para la industria, pero la pregunta ahora que quizás muchos se hagan es, ¿y cómo nace la certificación o cómo hacen ustedes la certificación de LPI? Ok, esta gráfica espero que pueda resumir cómo se trabaja en LPI. En LPI, en primer lugar, las primeras tópicos nace desde la comunidad. La comunidad es que nos entrega a LPI el decirnos, oye, mira, ya hay una nueva versión del kernel, mira, yo creo que este tópico podemos modificarlo. Entonces, esta creación de tópicos de exámenes de LPI viene de la comunidad. Esta primera versión, un draft, es colocado en una base de datos de todos los tópicos que podrían estar presentes, que es público, que todos tienen acceso a ella, y luego la comunidad mismo hace que se revisen los principales tópicos. Entonces, de una gran cantidad de lista de preguntas que van relacionadas a las áreas del trabajo diario, no estamos basados en base a preguntas muy básicas, sino más bien a problemas sustanciales que se desarrollan en la vida diaria de una persona, es que se comienza a consultar a la comunidad. Mira, esto va a resumir las preguntas que creemos más importantes. Pasa por una revisión, pasa por un testeo otra vez con la comunidad, y la comunidad es la que va a aprobar que esta certificación, que estos tópicos y que estas preguntas de exámenes sean las más correctas para un mundo globalizado. Algo que tener en cuenta es que nuestras certificaciones están basadas en Linux. Es decir, que nuestra certificación puede trabajar bajo cualquier distribución de Linux, que esté basada en puntos dev o en puntos RPM. Entonces, la pregunta es, ¿queremos profesionales que solamente estén dedicados a una sola distribución? ¿O queremos un profesional que pueda estar trabajando en múltiples plataformas, en múltiples distribuciones? Sabiendo que al día de hoy tenemos granjas de servidores que trabajan con muchas distribuciones. Por ejemplo, seguridad puede ser un Parrot OS, en el tema el servidor web puede estar en Debian, pueden tener que tengamos nuestra infraestructura en CentOS. Entonces esta complejidad de servidores hace que en vez que la persona esté dedicada solamente a una sola distribución, hacemos que este profesional se pueda mover sobre cualquier distribución. Entonces, luego que estos tópicos, estas preguntas ya pasaron por esta revisión, sale la versión final. Esta versión final, mientras que se está desarrollando en inglés como lengua madre, luego de ahí pasa a una traducción en los diferentes idiomas que estamos atendiendo. Al día de hoy, las certificaciones del EPI son traducidas en 10 idiomas. Y una vez que eso está ya comprometido, sale la versión alfa para que pueda ser brindada a la comunidad. Y no es que quede ahí eternamente, por eso que pongo un círculo en la parte de arriba, luego de la difusión de la nueva certificación, sino que nuevamente regresa al principio. Una vez que ya está liberada, otra vez la comunidad sigue en constante revisión. Y es así como las certificaciones del EPI evolucionan muy a menudo. Entonces, creo que eso es importante mencionar. César, de repente aquí tú nos quieres comentar algo, ya que tú tienes un poco más de experiencia en el tema de intervenir en el desarrollo de los exámenes del EPI.
Solamente enfatizar, Hernán, que realmente las certificaciones no salen simplemente de la cabeza de los ejecutivos del LPI, siempre es una respuesta de nosotros a la necesidad de la comunidad, de la comunidad de profesionales y también de las empresas. Por ejemplo, las más nuevas certificaciones que existen en Linux Professional Institute, la certificación Linux Essentials. La certificación Linux Essentials empezó a ser creada porque muchas empresas que nos contactaron, en especial en Japón y en los países de Europa, incluso España, es que lo que se pasaba era que los profesionales certificados en el PIC 1 dentro de una empresa, otras empresas los sacaron porque necesitaban de aquel tipo de conocimiento. Entonces las empresas procuraron a LPI y nos pidieron, ustedes por favor no pueden crear una certificación más básica y así nosotros vamos a contratar personas que tienen esa certificación más básica y trabajar a través de la gestión de las personas, beneficios para que esas personas se queden en nuestra empresa y que se certifiquen también dentro de nuestra empresa, o sea, cambiar las certificaciones como un beneficio para las personas que están en la empresa. Y así, sí, creamos la certificación Linux Essentials y además creamos también un otro programa, que es el programa Hiring Partner, que una empresa puede cambiarse en un partner de LPI y utilizar la ventaja de nuestro programa de miembros y también los descuentos que tienen en las certificaciones para sus empleados. Básicamente lo mismo, pero claro, con una historia original un poco diferente, se pasó con la certificación de DevOps. Antes de entrar en la certificación de DevOps, la certificación Linux Essentials fue un suceso tan grandioso que la comunidad pidió a LPI que crease otras certificaciones de mismo nivel, otras certificaciones Essentials. Y así ya tenemos casi lista la certificación de Web Essentials. Muy temprano vamos a tener también de Security Essentials y IoT Essentials. Y las personas ya empezaron a pedir a nosotros que creásemos certificaciones de Data Science Essentials, Blockchain Essentials, todas estas están siendo consideradas. La certificación de DevOps, volviendo a la certificación de DevOps, también las empresas nos decían que había varios entrenamientos en la línea de soft skills, en métodos ágiles y cosas así, que claro, son importantes, pero necesitaron también de una certificación para las herramientas para la profesión de DevOps. Y así el IPI creó la certificación DevOps Tools, que son las herramientas que las personas que están en esa comunidad DevOps utilizan en su día a día. Así simplemente, Hernán, para realmente enfatizar eso que decías, que todas las certificaciones, no, además de la primera, por supuesto, el IPI creó la certificación LPQ1 hace 20 años, pero después todas las otras certificaciones, incluso la LPQ1, siempre son desarrolladas conjuntamente con nuestra comunidad.
Y lo último que estamos haciendo, ¿no? Y acá de repente Juan nos puede ayudar con la certificación de Star IT, que también va desarrollada al primer nivel de profesionales en tecnología, ¿cierto, Juan?
Sí, es una introducción básicamente en distintas áreas de tecnología. O sea, mezcla, por ejemplo, tratamiento de base de datos, administración de base de datos, seguridad, desarrollo, la parte justamente de Linux, análisis de datos incluso incluye. O sea, es como agarrar y de una empezar a tocar diferentes áreas, pero claro, en el lado básico. Y nada, quiero trasladarle una consulta que están preguntando en el chat. Dice, ¿las certificaciones caducan o hay que renovarlas o son de por vida?
Tú, Juan, creo que eres la persona más idónea para responder esa pregunta.
Bueno, les comento que los certificados de Linux Essentials, o sea, todos los Essentials que van a ir saliendo, actualmente tenemos disponible una, no caducan. Pero sí, las certificaciones de LPIC, por ejemplo, las profesionales en los distintos niveles, sí tienen, digamos, no es que vencen, pero necesitan ser renovadas cada 5 años como debido a las actualizaciones que pueden ir sufriendo a lo largo de los 5 años, porque esto va a ir siempre evolucionando. Se pueden cambiar de tópicos, por ejemplo, ahora se está lanzando, o sea, se acabó de lanzar una versión nueva del LPIC 3, entonces, no, sí o sí es necesario ir actualizando y lo que también ofrece LPI es la oportunidad de formar parte de un programa de miembros o membership, en lo que básicamente consiste en poder mantener activo la certificación que está por, digamos, caducar a través de, digamos, una forma de mostrar que uno se mantiene activo dentro de la comunidad a través de conferencias, ya sea como participante o como speaker. Entonces, hay un programa que va orientado a esas personas que están muy activos en la comunidad y, digamos, darle como beneficio el hecho de extender la validez de su certificación. O sea, no tener que retomar el examen.
Es correcto. Entonces, para solamente enfatizar el tema de la comunidad. Los otros exámenes de certificación nacen, crecen y evolucionan junto con la comunidad. Y por eso estamos muy contentos con esta alianza que tenemos con la Document Foundation, porque esto valida que nuestras acciones que hacemos realmente están hechas por la comunidad. La Document Foundation es una comunidad desarrollada para la parte ofimática y nosotros estamos muy felices de poder continuar con esta labor social. ¿Sí? ¿Avanzamos? Entonces, ya que sabemos que el tema que es importante, el tema de la certificación, ya que sabemos cómo a grandes rasgos están desarrolladas las certificaciones del EPI, donde el EPI juega un rol básicamente de tener expertos que evalúan esta información para poder poner a disposición el examen que tenga los mayores altos grados de calidad en cuanto a el filtro de mejores empleados, es que tenemos que evaluar los skills requeridos. Juan, ¿te gustaría hablar sobre este slide, por favor?
Claro, con gusto. Nosotros lo clasificamos, digamos, actualmente en 4 posibles perfiles, que son los sysadmin, los developers, especialistas en DevOps y, claro, seguridad, que siempre me ha gustado seguridad, por ejemplo, de manera personal. Y para todos ellos, digamos, como pueden ver, cada una de nuestras certificaciones, digamos, influyen de alguna u otra manera. O sea, por ejemplo, tener el LPIC 1 de Linux Administrator no solo te sirve como sysadmin, también te sirve en el caso de que quieras seguir en el lado de developer, DevOps o security. Y así sucesivamente, y al ir a los niveles, escalando los niveles más altos, se van dividiendo. Por ejemplo, el LPIC 3 va variando dependiendo del perfil. Y, por ejemplo, si seguimos en el camino de DevOps, tenemos también disponibles una certificación de DevOps Tool Engineer. Entonces, son formas de ir demostrando que, digamos, tenemos realmente los skills necesarios para los puestos vacantes que hoy son muy exigidos en el mercado global. Y para continuar un poco, entonces, queremos compartir con ustedes cómo pueden, digamos, tener estas oportunidades. Claro, primer paso sería aprender, estudiar de manera autodidacta con la comunidad o buscando centros de formación. Luego deben certificarse, o sea, aplicar a los exámenes, aprobar, y una vez que tengan estos certificados, incluso no solamente es ir ustedes de manera personal y buscar el trabajo. El EPI también los ayuda a través de un portal de personas que lanzamos, en donde pueden recibir, digamos, vacancias laborales que son, digamos, publicadas por nuestros socios que se encuentran en los programas de Hiring Partner que estuvo comentando recientemente César Brot. Y bien abajo pueden ver todos los programas con los cuales cuenta el EPI, que son el Community Partner para comunidades, el Academic y el Training Partner orientado a la academia y empresas privadas, el Hiring, que son también para empresas privadas que contratan staff necesario, que necesiten skills técnicos, y otros programas, ¿verdad?, que se van adecuando a distintos objetivos que puedan tener las compañías a nivel global. Este es un mapa de calor donde pueden ver, digamos, en todo a nivel global en donde el EPI está actuando, donde tiene cabida, y como pueden ver es en casi todos. Son muy pocos las regiones o países en donde, digamos, el EPI no está dentro, pero entonces esto significa que, por ejemplo, yo que me encuentro en Paraguay, si me certifico con el EPI, me puedo ir a Europa y tranquilamente ser, digamos, reconocido a través de mi certificación y postularme. O sea, van a tomar como válido y van a valorar, digamos, los conocimientos que llega a tener.
Y no solamente ir, sino podría hacer teletrabajo, ahora que estamos con toda la modalidad en línea.
También.
Sí.
Y esto es un gráfico nada más, unos números que tenemos acerca de la cantidad de exámenes que ya hemos entregado en todos estos años. Un aproximado de los certificados que hemos emitido, porque esto va en aumento. Y claro, mencionar que las certificaciones de LPI están disponibles en 10 idiomas. O sea, el idioma hoy en día ni siquiera es una barrera para poder certificarse. Y esto era algo un poco lo que queríamos estar presentando a todos, hablar un poco de lo que sean las oportunidades laborales, cómo se desarrollan las certificaciones y, digamos, incluso cómo llegar a ellas. Claro, sería compartir eso con ustedes. Estamos casi en el tiempo, entonces no tenemos de momento más consultas. Y bueno, cedo la palabra a César Brod y a Hernán Pachas por si quieran comentar algo final.
Solamente
It seems there are some technical issues in the Hamburg location, so let's wait for a moment.
Check 1, 2, check. Okay. Yeah, so the big ball of mud caused me to have a bug in my brain, so I don't have a title here, but I will talk about the big ball of mud, which is as we client, as we modify in Writer. Just quickly to give you an overview, I already talked about that before, but just as a small reminder on why you should maybe avoid that, using that in new code in Writer if you in any way can. Next slide. So what is SW client, SW modify? Well, it's in the most basic form, it's an observer pattern. So you can use this for dependency inversion, which means, for example, if you have the model of the document, the model never needs to know about the layout of the document. So, but maybe the layout wants to know if the model changes. So how do you do that? You have an observer pattern where the layout observes the model, and if anything changes, the model sends out like a notification, a hint that something changed in the model, and the layout can adapt to that. That's like the basic sane idea of an observer pattern. Unfortunately, you can stack other things on top of it, and then it gets a lot less sane. And if you combine all those things, things get complicated and hard to debug. Some of the things Writer developers did in the past, because they had this one thing, they thought, well, maybe we can use it for memory management and shared ownership too. And also, well, I already have this thing that kind of does collect stuff. Maybe I use it as a container too. And all of these things will cause you pain and trouble. And I will go quickly into next slide. 3 problems that you might have with SW client, SW modify. The first is from the intrinsic list implementation that it uses. The second one is what I call 3 raccoons in a trench coat. We'll get to that later. And the last one is typed container abuse. So yeah, all of these are essentially problems caused by the usage of SW client, SW modify. Okay, next slide, intrinsic list implementation. So like in the basic, I said this is an observer pattern. So you have an SW client that maybe is the model, something in the model, and you have something that wants to observe that, for example, a layout, and then you listen to that. And this is implemented as an intrinsic list. So all the things that listen to one thing are linked in the double linked list intrinsically in these clients. And that has implications. For example, you can only listen to one thing and not to multiple things. And there are Michael Stahl and others. Well, actually, there existed old hacks around it, which is SW depend, which are very ugly. And Michael Stahl did an implementation, SW multi-listener, which is a little bit less ugly, but it's still using a lot of voodoo and things that might get wrong in like corner cases and stuff. It's not a fault of these implementations. It's just essentially already workaround through the basic problem that you have with using an intrinsic linked list for this kind of stuff. So that's like the first thing that you might find problematic. And if you ever find an SW depend, well, that's you will see how ugly the code around that easily can get. So second problem, 3 raccoons in a trench coat. I asked you to git grep for static cast get registered in. And you will find many cases of this being used. Get registered in is if you have a listener that observes something, the get registered in will give you what this thing is listening to. And kind of can make sense, but already is, I mean, you didn't want to have this this relation to be too hard, but anyway. So that is returning, because this is like the base class, it just returns an SW modify. So it can, since everything in Rust is an SW modify, it can be anything. But much code is just saying, well, yes, for example, a layout, and there's some model object next to it, and it just says, yeah, well, I want to listen to this thing. And then later, it says, well, I know I listened to that thing, so I know the type of that thing, and I can easily statically cast to whatever I had there. But the default behavior of this, and that probably made sense in one very specific corner case of layout, so you can't kill it, is when the thing that you listen to dies, it just makes you listen to whatever it itself was listening to. So just listening to something and then later assuming that it's still the same type is an interesting, it's a brave move, to say it like that. And that brave move is very common in Writer. And obviously, this is it's hard to detect if this changes in some way. So you might cause type confusion in weird corner cases by just refactoring code. So this is another reason to get rid of SW client, SW modify. Next slide. And the 3 raccoons in the code are obviously, I mean, the code is the static cast. The 3 raccoons you are like expecting your detective to be in the code, and instead you have 3 raccoons. And well, that doesn't work well in C++. 3 raccoons never do good in anything, especially not in memory. Yeah, and the next thing is type container abuse. Well, you have one thing, and which is the stuff you're observing and multiple listeners listening to it. And well, that's kind of a container of those things that are being listening. So I can also use this, iterate through it. Although that's, of course, completely wrong, because you did the whole thing in the beginning to have a dependency inversion, so that the thing that the client does not need to know what the listeners are. So you should, in a good world, never do this, but it is being done. And just to make things worse, it's being done in a typed way. So you are just having a client, something that is being observed, and then you say, oh yeah, I want to know all the stuff that is listening to this, which is of one specific type. And this is iterating through the whole list of listeners and just gives you the types that you want. But that also means if you just add some more listeners somewhere, we actually might make stuff slower for someone else, because they are iterating over all your listeners while actually looking for something completely different. So that again is grown historically, but it's not something that is helpful in keeping away from performance regressions and stuff. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so I tried to get rid of some of this, and since the last time I was ranting at a conference about this, which was 2 years ago, I just looked into the Git log, and I did some 150 commits trying to kill different uses of this old pattern. And as this is all, like the title says, a big ball of mud, if you pull at one end, it's like playing Jenga. Something else might fall over at the other end. And so there were some regressions, and put some down here. And sorry for causing them. Thanks for the people who did the bisect on them, and I tried to fix them, except for one of those bug IDs is probably wrong, because if you see the brown paperback commit, which referred to the wrong bug ID, probably I used some wrong bug ID, but at least 4 of these 5 bugs were actually regressions that I had to fix just by doing this rework. So is it worth it if you're causing 5 regressions to do this refactoring? I think it is, because this is still much clearer and easier to detect and fix than if you get these bugs in some random, actually implementing a feature, and just as a side effect get weird regressions of this kind. Yeah, so in many cases these were removed and replaced, but some cases are really hard, and those are the ones that are remaining. Just one case that I'm currently working on, and actually I wanted to have this done by now, but this is one thing where I wanted to get rid of the SW client, SW modify relation. So you have an SW table box format and an SW table box, which is like the box in a table, and the definition which says how it looks like. And yeah, some code assumes that there's a one-to-one relation between the table box and its format. Other code is written in a way that makes sure that this is not the case. And there's some functions that clean this up, so that make it a one-to-one relation again. And also you have the SW cell frames, which is the layout, doing all the layout essentially for this stuff. So you have already 2 things listening to the format, different things and expecting very different things from it. And one is sometimes a one-to-one relation and sometimes a one-to-n relation, making this all very confusing if you read the code and try to just pull it out. Next slide. Yeah, this is how it looks in the code. If you have like an SW iterator and then just, give me the first of this kind, and then it just assumes that either it has only 1 or 0, and it never assumes that there are more. And there are two functions that clean this up, like that say, oh, if there's more than one, then make myself an own format again. So clone this and create a new one for myself. Also, probably this could be refactored to be just one place and not 2 places. But yeah, lots of work to do there, I guess. But that's not the worst part of it. Next slide, maybe. It gets really interesting if you look at who owns the format. And like I said in the beginning, if you have an observer pattern and you have like a document model and a layout, and you want to have maybe the model exist and work perfectly fine without ever knowing about the layout, and the layout just reacting to stuff that happens in the model in a perfect world, well, yeah, that goes out of the window if the layout partially owns things in the model. Because both the table boxes as also the SW cell frames, when they deregister from a format, so they are not interested in it anymore, they check if they are the last ones, and if they are the last one, they just kill the format too. That happens in 2 places, of course, because it's 2 classes. So essentially the cell frames and the table boxes together own their format. So it's like a shared pointer, except that it's very, very confusing and non-obvious how they relate to each other. So untangling this, of course, is really, really hard and annoying. And this is why I can't tell you right now that I solved it for this particular thing. I hope I get to that in like a week or 2, and then can go on to from the table box to the table line, and then to the table, and then tear slowly apart these 2 things so that finally we will have these things separated. Yeah, so this is basically the overview of what I, in my free time, sometimes do when I'm bored and want to dig into the dark and darkest places of Writer. There's one final call, please. In new code, don't use SW client and SW modify. And while if you're in some specific corner of Writer and you're implementing a feature and you understood that corner of Writer well, please, if you can, try to get rid of SW client and SW modify in that particular case, because like I showed for the table boxes, it's sometimes really hard to wrap your head around how this stuff is used in one specific case. And once you have this knowledge, it might be well to use it so that the next person who walks into that code doesn't trip on too many booby traps left behind from the history. Yeah, so that was my talk. I hope I can give you some success story in a week or 2 about SW table boxes, and that I'm not causing too many more regressions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And yeah, go on and applaud him. Yeah, so I'm not seeing any questions in the chat room. Only Cisco saying that you also fixed some issues accidentally, so you shouldn't feel bad about the regressions. So life is wonderful sometimes. And yeah, I'm obviously bisecting some of these myself as well. So, yeah, no worries. And if
Again,
someone has any questions, please go forward and ask them.
Again, thanks to the bisectors, that helps a lot if you're moving around in this code. And I know that there's at least one bisected bug that I still need to regression that I still need to solve. So sorry about that one. Anything?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions, so I guess we can wrap it
Maybe
up.
get up here and ask the question.
Oh,
Okay, I'll repeat the question then.
So, how many more uses of this problematic are there still?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number. So maybe about this cleanup, just one short answer, longer answer, sorry about that, is like everything in Writer is an SW modifier and an SW client, and they are like a tree. Everything is listening to something, and if you want to get rid of them, you have to start at the leaves, like the stuff that has no stuff that is observing it. And if you can kill that, then you can move on to the next, and then you can move on to the next, and so on and so on. Yeah, but I don't have the exact numbers. I might look them up later.
So, no idea when this work
No,
finish?
no, not quite. So the question was, is there like a promised deadline for or a commitment to when this is solved? Sorry, no. Okay, are we done?
yeah, we can call it a wrap.
Thank you.
Cheers. And there was much rejoicing. So now we have a small break, and in like 8 minutes we have the next talk. The next talk will be given by Italo Vignoli, and it's about open source and open standards for digital sovereignty.
Hello. I will start sharing my screen. Let's wait for 2 p.m. Okay. So free open source software and open standards for digital sovereignty. There is a growing discussion about the concept of digital sovereignty at different levels. It is one of the topics where I think in Europe there is more attention than in other continents. The European Union has started an activity to at least understand and improve the level of digital sovereignty that has been that we are experiencing so far. So first, what is digital sovereignty? Basically, is the ability by a state or a federation of state to provide the digital technologies which are critical for the citizens. So they are critical for the welfare, for competitiveness of the system, and the ability of using our own citizen rights in an effective way through digital tools. The way the digital sovereignty can be achieved is by using software and formats that do not hide or forbid sharing of contents, but on the other hand, ensure that the sharing of contents happens with the security that is needed to avoid risk of data, which in this case are citizens' data, are stolen by a third party. Unfortunately, at the moment, we are not in this position. On the contrary, in that area, in some areas, there is a dependence from large software vendors, which is in some case insane, like in the case of the human genes. So the community of research scientists had to rename more than 24 of human genes because their names couldn't be handled properly by Excel. So instead of having Excel being patched to accept names, the entire community, so basically 8 billion people, had their human genes renamed to please one single company. This is just unbelievable in terms of ethics. There shouldn't have been even a formal request. The company should have changed the way that Excel behaves to accept human genes names. So unfortunately, we are far from the ideal position. In Europe, there is a growing concern about the impact on our data, on the privacy of European citizens, by North American companies. And in addition, the fact that many of these technology, for different reasons, are not really secure, it putting at risk the entire infrastructure of, for instance, of healthcare data at European level. But healthcare is just one of the examples, but there can be many more. There are some initiatives at European level. We are not still there in terms of effectiveness. European politicians are trying to understand, some of them, not all of them, of course, European politicians are trying to understand what it means to create an infrastructure which is respectful of digital sovereignty. At the moment, the current situation is basically that we produce the data, European citizens produce the data, North American companies own the data. Of course, the situation is more complex, but if you want to summarize it with a sentence, is we produce the data, they own the data. The intended paradigm should be exactly the opposite. Should be that we know who is creating the data, we know how he is sharing the data, we know how the data that are shared are formatted, and we know how the data that are shared are managed in order to guarantee security and privacy. Can we go back? Can we regain control of our data? Yes, we have the tools, but these tools are not used a lot. They are not used uniformly in Europe. They are not used in every country. They are not used in every geography. And even within countries, there are big differences between regions, provinces, landers, or whatever you call them. So unfortunately, the situation is that our data are still owned by some data monopolists, which are known with the GAFAM acronym, so Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. But the reality is that if we look at the documents, the number of companies is smaller. If we look at technologies, of course, there are other technologies that concur to this situation. To summarize the difference between proprietary and free open source software. So proprietary software protects the user by obfuscating the algorithm. So you basically don't see what happens. And by obfuscating algorithms and information, they also obfuscate the way end user data are handled. So on the contrary, free open source software protects the user with transparency. We declare how we share the source code. We declare how we share contents. We provide all the information about the methodologies used by projects to manage end user data. So it would be easy, because the tools are there, to enforce digital sovereignty in Europe. But of course, it is needed that all the countries agree on a common base of tools. which is the situation in terms of proprietary software. I would say the large majority of governments in Europe use proprietary software for desktop productivity and cloud storage. And this is independent from the level of confidentiality. There is a false assumption that data can be stored in one geography, in one continent. Let's say that data, the way that data are managed by the large, huge infrastructure of these companies doesn't make possible to guarantee that the data are in a continent and do not move outside that continent, even if temporarily, simply because the infrastructure is built in a way that knowing where the data are, even if they are always available, but knowing where they are located is basically impossible. So this puts our data, and especially confidential information such as health data, at risk. And this is confirmed by the Schrems II sentence from the Court of Justice of the European Union. What would change with free open source software? European governments would regain control of the citizens' personal data and manage them according to their confidentiality. Of course, you have to implement, deploy a secure infrastructure. You have to deploy something which is not easy to deploy. You need to add security. You need to have professional people manage this. But the tool allows these people to guarantee certain basic conditions, which are the confidentiality and privacy of data, the fact that the data are not moving around, but they stay in somewhere where they have been based, and also switching to free open source software would include moving from proprietary to standard document formats, and this would represent a huge advantage in terms of interoperability, and in addition, in terms of security of data, because we should always remember that proprietary document format are less secure by a factor of 10 in comparison with open source, with open document standards. Apparently, it's a no-brainer, but the problem is that politicians who are not technology experts see the GAFAMs as a part of the system, and therefore they consider GAFAM's issues as blocker for the digital transformation process, and they help them see what happened with the Gene names and Microsoft. On the contrary, the politicians, exactly because they do not understand technology, do not see free open source software as part of the system, and therefore ignore flaws as it was not good enough. There is a Free Software Foundation Europe project, Public Money and Public Code, which is intended to create awareness on this issue. And I think we should always think about this project. We should work and help Free Software Foundation Europe to carry on this project. Document format, in addition, are a blocker in some cases. Government should be platform independent and allow only document standards, because the known standards can be tweaked in a way which is not visible, to prevent interoperability. In addition, in some cases, the proprietary formats are enforced. I have a recent experience in Italy of one of the most important authorities forces companies and citizens to buy Adobe Acrobat to edit a PDF. The PDF cannot be edited with any other software, with any other PDF compliant software. And this is a clear violation of the Italian law, but not only of the Italian law, of the European law in general. So the problem is that only standards associated to free open source software can solve the problem of document formats. And we have ODF, which is a fantastic format. We have already covered the format in other talks, but I will cover some specificities here. So there is a lock-in associated with the format. We can write, we cannot read your documents. Microsoft can publish a guide, a manual, how to lock in your clients. This is, I think, rather significant. Only thinking about such a manual is a clear testimonial of the wrong attitude of a company in this area. So ODF was developed to be vendor neutral. We all know that although it was based originally on the OpenOffice.org format, it was forced to become independent, and in fact, OpenOffice.org had to change its native format to reflect the standard, because the organization that was designing and improving the standard privileged the benefit of interoperability on the advantage of having a format which is strictly connected to one software, which is exactly the opposite that happened with Office OpenXML. So Office OpenXML, apart from not being a standard, as the standard has never been the standard approved by ISO, has never been really implemented in a document, but has been designed by Microsoft for Microsoft product. So this is unfortunately the reality. We have a format that was born from a company to maintain its position in the market, a market that we should always remember is valued at between 25 and $30 billion. So of course, a company that controls probably 50 to 60% of that market, which means from 18 to 22, 23 billion dollars, can make whatever to protect that amount of money. Also because that amount of money is close, it's almost 100% pure earnings, because the costs are negligible in comparison with the turnover. So the difference between the two standards is that ODF has been designed with the future in mind, so to be a document standard for the next 20 to 50 years, to liberate users from the lock-in strategy, and to foster interoperability. Office OpenXML has been designed with the past in mind, so to propagate yesterday document issues and lock in for the next 20 to 50 years. And this, of course, to the detriment of users and interoperability. And the reality is that in addition of these advantages, ODF, and in particular, if we look at text document, ODT, the complexity of the file is basically close to zero. XML files are human readable, as they should be, but they are so clear that when I show them to end users, they are always amazed by how clear, straightforward, how simple is the XML document behind the file. And the opposite happens when I show them a Word document. It's the level of complexity is the highest possible. They have reinvented and redesigned what it was possible to reinvent and redesign. The XML schema is developed, looks like has been developed by someone who has no idea of XML, is not human readable, and it's full of redundancy, duplications, that it's, you ask yourself if really, if the developers are not capable, or on the contrary, if all this is totally intentional to make the interoperability difficult, if not impossible. And there are also some myths about Office OpenXML. Microsoft says, but our format is better and it's better documented. So no, the format is not better, by the way, but it's not even better documented. More than 80% of the documentation, which is over 7,000 pages, is used to reinvent the wheel. So to describe proprietary Microsoft format adopted to replace available open standards, for instance, VML over SVG. Of course, ODF doesn't need to add the vector graphic description, because that is already a standard, is SVG, and that has already a description. To describe the incredibly convoluted XML schema, which is not based on any XML convention. For instance, text is used for text. When you have a line of text or a paragraph, you have the opening tag is text and the closing tag is text. In the case of Microsoft Office, the opening tag is W for Word, is A for PowerPoint, and is a different, another different tag for Excel, although Excel is not supposed to be a software to handle text strings. Strong is used for bold, and you don't have the same in Microsoft Office. And so even someone who is proficient at XML, to understand the Office OpenXML schema, has to study again XML. And then in addition, they describe the proprietary elements of legacy and Microsoft Office format, which are not part of the ISO standard, but the reality is that they are part of the document that are created by users today. So Office OpenXML is not better documented. and it's not backward compatible. The problem is exactly the opposite. So Office OpenXML is backward compatible with the legacy Microsoft Office documents. So with Doc, XLS, PPT. But it's not compatible with the Office OpenXML standard docs because they basically do not exist, because the Office OpenXML strict has never been adopted by users, because has always been the last option in the Save As menu when available, because it's not always available. It's not available with Office 365 and Office for Mac. Office OpenXML files are not versioned. You know the version of the software that has created the file, but not the version of the standard. And believe me, the number of versions of the standard should be extremely high, because if you look at the document published, but not discussed in public and not submitted to ISO, published by Microsoft, which are evolutions of the original standard, there are quite many, but you don't know when their rules are implemented and if they are all implemented. So what happens is that the documents are not consistent over time, probably exactly because the different versions, if they were documented. And 100% of them, or if you prefer 99.99% of them, is proprietary Office OpenXML transitional. So we should avoid using, people should avoid using those formats. Unfortunately, the majority of people is using them. We are, as LibreOffice project, doing an incredible job to be interoperable, but is really like shooting at a moving target while standing on a motorbike running at 100 kilometers per hour. And you are not only the shooter, but also the motorbike driver. So basically shooting without having any reference and any control. Thank you for listening. And if there are questions, I'm happy to answer questions. Otherwise, this is the end of my presentation, and I will switch on the camera again.
Thanks. So far, we only have a comment from Lothar saying it's not just the government, it is also every citizen who should get control and decision about the data usage.
Yeah, in fact, government should represent the citizens. Therefore, government, we should be able to control everything through government that protects citizens by doing the good, by making the right choices. But it's unfortunately, this is something that we are repeating ourselves since almost forever, and I hope we will be able to find someone who listens soon, or more frequently than is currently happening. Okay, so I think the first session is over. The first half day is over, and we can have a coffee before the closing session starts in room 1.
Yep, coffee is allowed.
Italian coffee is suggested.
Okay, see you in room 1 then.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye and thank you.